Welcome to MSUA's Game Changers Live, where we speak with satellite and mobile connectivity thought leaders about industry trends, new technologies, and share what you need to know about satellite technology and where it's headed in the future. I'm your host, Lisa Dreer. Today, our guest is Rebecca Cowen-Hirsch. She is the Senior Vice President, Government Strategy and Policy at Inmarsat Government. Welcome to the show, Rebecca.
Thanks, Lisa. It's really great to be here.
Yeah, so maybe we can start by just having you give a little bit of background about yourself and Inmarsat Government.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, of course, let me start with Inmarsat because that's really far more important. So Inmarsat, of course, is the leading global satellite communications provider for mobility services. We've actually been flying satellites in excess of some 40 years now. Rich history started with initially the sole purpose to prevent lost sailors at sea so that there was no Titanic on our watch, if you will. So it started with that heritage of safety services and then has evolved into a rich multiple frequency set of networks that cover the globe to be able to provide mobility services at L-band as well as K-band, which means everything from satellite phones all the way through to huge video streaming pipes, and continue to do that with that basis of foundation of safety services. So, 99% reliability, always available. I joined Inmarsat, it seems like yesterday at any given point in time, but it's been a little bit longer. I've been with the company now for about 12 years. Prior to joining Inmarsat, I actually was in the Department of Defense. I was a member of the Senior Executive Service where I led a number of different efforts, established the first Defense Spectrum Office, and then also was the Program Executive Officer for SATCOM Teleport and Services. At the end of the day, though, I'm really just a latent flight test engineer that loves satellites and loves solving people's tricky problems from an altitude that most of us can't even begin to envision. So it's a really great combination. I'm an engineer by training, or recovering engineer by trade, and really love to be able to help people solve their real problems and to do it with satellite communications.
Wow, that's an amazing background you have. So when you look at some of the things that are happening in the industry today, what are some of the trends that you're really kind of keeping an eye on?
It is an exciting time to be in space, in satellites, and particularly in satellite communications. I think that nowadays people are beginning to know more about satellite communications than they ever envisioned. In fact, it even is making the headlines of non-trade press. There's a lot of enthusiasm about what's happening in the industry, an enormous amount of investment and technological advances and innovations. And so that just makes it a very tangible, exciting time period. I think most people in the general public really take for granted, or perhaps are completely unaware of how much satellites and satellite communications enrich their day-to-day lives. Everything from being able to do a transaction at an ATM machine to get cash, to being able to use your cellular telephone. And of course, the work that I do is primarily in national security. So everything from support to telemedicine to the troops, as well as very interesting services for UAVs and everything else. But what's really exciting is this investment that's taking place today is resulting in some really spectacular advancements. The shrinking of the terminal size, which from a user perspective means that it's less weight, it's smaller, it can actually get greater data rates, so you can do more things with it in terms of data transmission, and it becomes more usable, more portable, more accessible. And of course, with the technology advancements, the price rate is going down. Yeah. On the space segment, I think most people are familiar with this really exciting investment in LEO satellites and all of the different broadband communication capabilities that may come along. It's created a huge amount of enthusiasm. And then, of course, for those of us that have been in the business, as I mentioned, for over 4 decades, the innovations that are taking place with these rich, solid companies to shrink the size of the terminals, enhance the throughput, and then just make more affordable and more relevant and rich data throughput capabilities available on a global basis is really enormous.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. There's so much happening right now. And I mean, especially with the commercialization of space as well, I think we see so much more innovation coming into the market, and yeah, lots of new space startups, and just a lot of exciting technology, like you mentioned. So when you look at the satellite industry today, what do you think the future looks like in terms of mobile connectivity?
So I have to pull out my Nostradamus hat and predict the future, right? Is that what you're
Yeah.
asking?
Yeah,
No, I
just
think,
a little bit.
yeah, well, these technological advancements and the economic impact of them is really exciting. So if you look at, I mentioned the LEO satellites, with all of these broadband communication, there's a lot of different startups. Those are very exciting, and it'll be fun to watch from a business standpoint to see who makes it through and who actually can enhance and enrich some of these capabilities. And of course, what has come as a result of that is a rapid manufacturing and the reduction in the size of the spacecraft, which makes launch a different proposition. So Inmarsat has been able to take great advantage of more of these rapid manufacturing processes to be able to accelerate timelines, to leverage scale in terms of production. So it actually allows us to invest and develop capability more readily and put it on the pipeline even sooner to be able to be ahead of need, which is really critically important because it's no one could have predicted long before we had the iPhone the type of applications that would subsequently be commonplace in a handheld device. Satellite technology is very much the same. There's an insatiable demand for throughput. So you need to be ahead of need. And that's what Inmarsat has done consistently in their history. And of course, as we look forward over the next 12 to 24 months, we will be adding to our L-band fleet. We will be adding to our Global Express capabilities, and we will be going into a different orbit. So in addition to the GEO where our satellites are operating today, we will be adding an Arctic capability to be able to have some payloads that go actually over the poles to be able to be the first commercial provider providing really good solid broadband all around the world, plus over the poles to be able to solve some of those really tricky problems that I mentioned earlier.
Wow. So what does that mean for government users that are, they're using Inmarsat services today, but what does that mean for their future, capabilities or, availability?
Well, it means that they will have accessibility on a global basis. And it means that, their capabilities or the terminals that they're employing today will be able to use the future systems, because Inmarsat always ensures that we have backwards compatibility. We consistently modernize our systems, and at some points in time, we sunset things over a certain lifetime, but we never leave any of our existing users behind. We progress them through the technological curve and allow them to gain access to more new and modernized services. For our military users, particularly when you add the Arctic component, that means in the northern latitudes where, whether it's homeland security in, upper regions of Alaska or global operations where they're operating up in the northern Nordic seas, you really get that enhanced throughput and reach well beyond what has traditionally been covered just from GEO. So it gets you into those northern latitudes where there's a significant activity. And as we can just see, it maintains and extends that usability. And of course, since it's an Inmarsat capability, it adds that additional enhanced security. You know that the company's going to be there. You also know that we've invested in the cybersecurity. Anyone who writes across our network can be assured that we're protecting our network for their purposes to ensure that it is richly available and it is constantly supporting those critical mobility users.
Right. So taking that to the next stage, we talked a little bit about the commercialization of space, and what do you think that means for the satellite industry as a whole?
Well, in another lifetime, it seems, the commercial industry was almost an afterthought as it related to space. Government was making the investment. They were doing some of these very interesting things, whether it was the race to the moon, and then subsequently with the satellite communication capability. Commercial industry has reversed that, such that commercialization of space has been in place for a very long time now. And the innovations that are taking place on the commercial side, from the software-defined radio elements of it, the adaptability, the ground segment that can be adaptive and responsive, the satellites and all the different technology, that actually really increases the rapidity, the capability, and also allows for new capabilities to be introduced and innovations to take place on scale. And with the massive amount of resources that are being invested into the industry, the economic impact of the satellite commercial industry is significant. And that makes a big difference in terms of knowing that that critical component of telecommunications is part of a diverse network. So it adds satellite communication in my field right alongside of terrestrial and right alongside the mobile communications from cellular, 3G, 5G. And when you begin to get into the 5G era, satellite communications is an extension and a critical component of 5G. All that is made possible through commercialization and innovation and investment in technology.
Right. So that's actually a really good segue into my next question, which is, what does this all mean from a user perspective? What do they need to be taking into consideration as they're rolling out enterprise communication solutions?
Right. So in someday in the future, putting again that Nostradamus hat on, the user truly will not be aware, much less truly care, whether their communication is going across satellite or terrestrial infrastructure or mobile infrastructure. Today, that's not the case. We're getting there with those convergence of capabilities. But from a user perspective for satellite communications, first of all, they really need to be aware of the reliability. They need to know that their information that they want to get from point A to point B, whether it is consumer broadband or whether it's critical military communications, that it can be reliably traversed from point A to point B via satellite. So reliability is critically important. Similarly, I mentioned security earlier. You need to ensure that the user needs to be confident that their information is protected, that the data that they're using across that network cannot be exfiltrated for purposes that, whether benign or intentional, they just need to be aware that their information is protected. And then, of course, from a user, you want to know that you can have access, whether I'm in Washington, D.C., or whether I'm in Singapore. I need to be able to know that I can have access to that same rich, reliable communication capability, and that it scales. Today, my requirements may be a thread of information that needs to go through. Tomorrow, it could be gigabytes worth of data and beyond. So to be able to have that scale, and it may be today that I'm one user, but tomorrow I'm multiple users. So scalability really matters. From a user perspective, also, satellites are fascinating, and space and satellite communication networks are critically important, in fact, critical infrastructure. But as a user, I want ease of use. I want as simple plug and play as I have when I use my cellular telephone. I want to be able to not worry about what it takes to establish that network, but that when I use my terminal, that it's going to connect reliably, and function the way I need to. I don't need to be a rocket scientist. I just need to be.
That would be good, right? It's so funny because I think we all forget, when we first had cell phones or we first had internet connectivity, and what a hassle it was to actually get connected, reliably connected. It really didn't exist, right? And so I think we're sort of going through that same evolution right now. Yeah.
That is so true. I mean, remember the day, this is a day in a distant galaxy far away, when you actually tolerated drops in the network, right? So you were driving down the road, you got to the point where you could drive down the road with a cell phone, and the network drops off and your call drops. Well, you just would redial. but
Hmm.
you would be frustrated. So in satellite communications, you don't want to have to deal with that type of network dropout. You want to be assured that you're going to have reliability. And so as a consumer, whether it's, you really want to rely on that service and know that it's there, and not worry about what's behind what's the magic behind that. That's why there are satellite owner operators and network providers like Inmarsat. That is our stock and trade. We want this to be available for you, the user, whether it's a military user or a commercial aviation user or a critical maritime user. We want ease of use, and we want it to be a value for money. So, and make it an affordable solution for you. I'm not necessarily saying that you want to, sometimes you do get what you pay for, but importantly, it's a value proposition that says this is going to be what it is that meets my mission requirement, whatever that means, my communication requirement, and know that these advanced technological advances, investments, and enhancements will be there ahead of need for you. And that's really very exciting today in today's environment.
Yeah. Are there different considerations for government users as opposed to enterprise commercial users?
The one thing that I would say is really more focus, or at least stated focus, on security. The consumer assumes that there's a security element in that. A military user demands it. And so, from an Inmarsat perspective, there are some of our most demanding users. And so we invest recognizing that what investments we make that serve the military well or national security users well benefit our commercial customers equally as well. Similarly, the government users benefit from our investment to support our commercial entities. So it's a very symbiotic relationship. Military users have some special, unique attributes that they demand. And when we make those available for them, they ultimately can become part of our commercial solution as well. So it really works quite well, such that the defense industry actually benefits from our commercial investments, and our commercial users benefit from that other relationship. So it works. It's a very good partnership and a very good corporate position. It adds diversity on many, many fronts.
Right. That's so good when they can boost up on both ends there. So, when you think about the new key technologies that are coming onto the market today, what are those technologies that the users really need to be aware of? And I'm talking about, enterprise business users or government users.
I think they really most need to be aware of the terminals that are coming on the pipeline, down the pipeline, and are readily available today. There's a lot of investment today in flat panel terminals, so that actually conforms to their platform, whether it's an aircraft or whether it's a Humvee, if you will. And those are really adding a lower profile, but yet higher throughput, miniaturization of terminals, to be able to actually reduce the footprint and the weight, and size, weight, and power matters when you're talking about a commercial platform, such as an aircraft, or certainly a military platform. Mm-hmm. So the terminal technologies are critically important. The work that we're doing at Inmarsat Government also is enabling modem or software type adaptability, so that you can actually leverage different networks while also consuming Inmarsat's network capabilities. Flexibility being the key element, so that you have that adaptability and choice, but really can maintain that reliability. So when you look at it from a user perspective, trust that the network adaptability, flexibility, and the security and the mobility equation are there. Demand that to be there, but from a user perspective, you want to look at what does that terminal do for you? That's your consumption device. That's how you consume the network. And there's so many advances going on, especially with the software adaptability and the modem technologies that are coming, that are available today, and even more so coming down the pipeline.
Right. So when they're looking at these new technologies, these new terminal technologies, what have you, are there things that they need to be doing today to plan for those new advancements?
Well, every business relationship starts with a conversation, and it starts with that is the foundation for that cooperation and that collaboration. Planning, when there are environments in which, let's look at in the government space, for instance, if you're going into an environment that has a certain demand structure, whether it's on a military ship, if you will, or even a maritime ship, that there are certain environmental characteristics that are necessary to be implemented inside that terminal. Those type of requirements, if you're, when you begin to articulate those requirements, then that actually stimulates the investment strategy of commercial providers that can actually innovate to address those needs, whether it's the yaw factors and the movement that's required, whether it's the environmental considerations, whether it's the size, weight, and power. So as a consumer or a user, you're in a really great position to be able to say, these are the type of attributes that I really would like to see in the terminals. So for many of our military users, there's a requirement to be able to roam across networks, to be able to use a military satellite communication capability, as well as right alongside a commercial satellite capability. So, we've actually developed the ability to have a government modem manager that allows those users in their terminal to be able to meet that requirement. So the conversation is what they should plan for, and looking ahead, envisioning what their expectations are, and then allowing the industry to respond and say, these are the type of things that can be done. And so it really begins to have that good, strong collaboration, requirements, definition, followed by technological innovation. And then, of course, the demand signal that says, we're interested in these new capabilities. Industry will meet you at your need. And innovate to be ahead of that demand curve.
Yeah. Well, great. That is really great advice, Rebecca. Thank you so much for being here with us today to share your insights on the satellite mobile connectivity and where it's headed. I really look forward to catching up with you again and talking about maybe more in depth on some of these topics.
Well, thanks, Lisa. It's, this is like I said, it's a very exciting time to be in the business, solving real people's problems and the impact of that can have, whether it's, that disaster response, we're right in the middle, getting ready to get into a very turbulent spring season following the tail end of winter. So there's a lot of different applications for satellites, and you can always rely on satellites to be there to meet the communication needs and to innovate and continue to strive to be ahead of the demand signal. So I look forward to the conversation, and thanks for having me on today.
Absolutely. We also want to take a minute to thank the Mobile Satellite Users Association for hosting these sessions. To learn how to participate in a Game Changers live session, become a member of the MSUA, or receive our weekly satellite mobile news newsletter with the latest in satellite insights, visit msua.org. We'll see you next time on MSUA's Game Changers Live.